Do you know, could you recite for me the last 10 words of the Old Testament? The last 10 words of the Old Testament. Here they are. Lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. That's the last word. For a couple, 300 years, as a matter of fact, before the New Testament ever got around, anything was ever written in the New Testament. That's the last word. Lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. The Hebrew word for curse, by the way, is kerem, which in this context means a doomed object. In the abstract, it means extermination, utter destruction. He says, lest I come and smite the earth with annihilation. That's really a kind of mind bender when you think about it, isn't it? That's what I call a real warning. I've seen these signs in Dallas and elsewhere where it says, don't make me come down there, signed God. And that's the implication of it, lest I come. You don't want me to come that way. The reason I'm bringing it to your attention today is because it lays out starkly the stakes in the game in which we're involved right now. The stakes are big. The stakes are, lest I come and smite the earth with utter destruction. The only people I know of who are making much of an effort to get us to think about this subject are movie makers. Last summer, we had those two major movies that dealt with asteroids headed toward the earth, large items. And I'll never forget in that one movie that they were talking about when they were getting everybody together and making the leaders of the countries face up to what it was, they said this is what scientists call an extinction event. This is one that means when this thing hits, nothing will survive. It's over. And, you can see the disbelief on the actors who did a superb job of conveying that feeling. And I know how I would feel if I had just been told that we are facing an extinction belief. An event, you can't believe that. The world has been going on and on. This is my planet. I've lived here all my life. Nothing can happen to this. And to have to face up to the fact that there even could be such a thing as an extinction event is very sobering. There was another movie that same summer, that dealt with these things and the attempts that men may make. And one of the reasons why movies are being made, one of the reasons why scientists are talking about it is because there's this huge belt of asteroids out there, of which less than 10% of them have ever been mapped and identified. Any one of which, might at some future time come into contact with or move out of its orbit or move into the Earth orbit and pose a threat to the world. And they say, I don't remember all of the size and destruction capability of them, but you get one of those things about a half mile across, and you wouldn't believe the amount of damage that it will do to the Earth. It would send us probably into a new ice age, just half a mile in diameter. And of course, the ones they were working with on these two movies were bigger than that, and big enough to cause an extinction event. Because of the amount of stuff they throw in the atmosphere, they block off the sunlight for so long that all plant life dies and everything else dies along with that in the process. You can't store enough stuff. You can't stay alive long enough to survive that kind of an event. Well, the crises always make good drama, and the extermination of life on the planet is the ultimate crisis, I guess. And it brings people face to face with themselves, and movie makers like it. Scientists are glad they do it because they need money to plot those asteroids, to plan all those things, and they all tell us it's not a matter of whether, it's just a question of when and how big when the first one hits us. Because it already happened to the Earth many times in the past. Now they have basically come to the conclusion that the extinction of the dinosaurs and all those huge life forms had to do with just such an event. Not as big as could conceivably happen to us in the future. So it's not a time, not something that might happen. It's something that will happen. It's only a question of when. And so there comes Malachi along. These last 10 words of the Old Testament. Lest I come and smite the earth with utter destruction. Now, I don't have any idea what Malachi thought that meant. I don't have any idea what anybody in the first century or 3rd century BC might have thought that meant. To think utter destruction, all life destroyed. I don't know what they would have dealt with that. Maybe they didn't even try to deal with it. But Only now do you begin to understand how simple this is. Not only could it happen from outer space, it could happen from right here on the planet with some of the fools around this world that are playing around with chemical and biological warfare. They have no idea where that sort of thing could ultimately go in this world. Malachi, though, was not making a movie. He was talking about some deadly serious stuff, and so was Jesus in Matthew 24 when he said this. This gospel of the kingdom, Matthew 24, verse 14, shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. And then down in verse 21, after he makes some other points on it, he says this, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So Jesus is also talking about, if not an extinction event, a series of events or a set of circumstances which would lead to extinction, unless something were done to prevent it from happening. Now, there are three important things that occurred to me from these two passages as I read about them and reflected on them. One is the very real possibility of utter destruction somewhere on our future horizon. Second is the very real fact that destruction can be avoided. And the third is it's going to apparently be also obvious that God must take a hand if we're going to avoid it. Now, the reason I bring this up is that this whole line of reasoning came to me for no other reason than I was sitting around with my feet up, staring across the V of my toes on the footstool, pondering, what should we be doing now? What's important to us right now? What is it that we should really be paying attention to as a church, as individuals, as Christians in the modern world? What's important? The world is becoming a very confused and confusing place. Churches are changing before our eyes in ways that nobody ever imagined would take place. I mean, we have experienced it in our own church, but don't just think it's here. It's everywhere. The old ecumenism that was around a few years ago, you may remember when they were talking about this so much. You haven't heard that much about it recently, have you? You hear about the Roman Catholic Church reaching out to the Anglicans, the Roman Catholic Church reaching out to the West, but all this is in a totally different spirit now from what it was 20 years ago. I don't get the feeling along the way that anybody has any ideas of a true ecumenical movement. What they're looking for now is tolerance. In other words, a shared communion, as it were, that we can come together shoulder to shoulder, pray before God without having to check each other out for knives before we come into the room together. Do you think that's an overstatement? And generations gone by, it was not an overstatement at all because of the hatred that existed between different parts of Christendom in those years gone by. One Church of Christ scholar, whose name I forget right now but could probably get, is seriously proposing that the wicked are not going to be eternally tormented in hell, but will be annihilated. Church of Christ. A Protestant scholar in Switzerland several years ago, it's probably been 30 years ago now, or maybe a little longer than that, wrote a fascinating essay on the fact that that really you could not support the doctrine of the immortality of the soul in the Bible, that it was just simply not there. And he explored some of the passages that are often used in this capacity and indicated that he thought it might indicate some kind of, not quite like the doctrine of soul sleep, but some kind of soul sleep. This is a Protestant. Now, when you realize that as we're moving into the modern world, a lot of the old institutions, a lot of the fear that was generated by the structured institutions like the Roman Catholic Church, a lot of the discipline that existed even in the Anglican Church, or the Methodist, or the Baptist Church, of course, discipline is strictly a local matter. But a lot of the discipline as existed in years gone by is disappearing. The people are feeling a freedom that they never felt before. And the ability to control information, control thought, is beginning to go away. And as a result of this, a lot of theologians, serious theologians, are questioning a lot of the old things, so that people are going to, as we get a little further along here, going to begin to wonder, where in the world are we? It's a feeling that's not terribly unfamiliar to us, is it? Whenever you see what has happened in our own church with some of the things that have taken place. Doctrines used to scare people in the ancient world. They used to use them for that. Hell, the idea of an eternal burning hell fire. You have an illiterate population, people who can't read the Bible. You have to read it to them, interpret it for them. And there are people who have a simple way of life where you scare them to death with hell in order to get them to do the right thing in their lives instead of doing the wrong thing. This was a workable thing, I guess, in some people's minds down through generations in working with a simple-minded, illiterate people. Not working with those people anymore. In fact, some of those doctrines aren't working with anybody very much anymore because they look in the Bible and they say, this is not compatible with the God that I encounter in the Bible. And I don't think we have seen anything yet. Now, the result of all this is confusion. And one of the outcomes of confusion is inaction. In fact, when you don't know what to do, it's not totally irrational to do nothing, right? Just sit there and wait. It may not be irrational, but it could be fatal. And that's the warning of Malachi and Jesus. The warning is that utter destruction is in our future unless. And it is that unless that I want you and I to think about for a little while today. The scripture is Malachi 4 and verse 5. Malachi 4, verse 5. That leads up to the statement, the last 10 words of the Old Testament. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with utter destruction. Now, this is a strange thing to say. Elijah was long dead and buried, right? Dead and buried, gone, history. Why in the world would God come along and say, I'm going to send you Elijah the prophet? Not somebody like Elijah. He just said Elijah. You'll have to come to some interpretation to come to that other conclusion. I'll send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. But because of Jesus' remarks in this, and I don't know if we would ever tumble to this if it weren't for this, but Jesus, in his remarks about John the Baptist, made it abundantly clear that Elijah was a type, that John was an antitype, and it becomes abundantly clear from Revelation 11 that there is yet another antitype of Elijah that is to come in the end time. Jesus, for example, talking about John the Baptist, he spoke of one who was to come in the spirit and the power of Elijah. Now, John the Baptist came in the spirit of Elijah, but not the power. He wasn't calling down fire from heaven at all. But the two witnesses in Revelation 11, when they come, are a different kettle of fish entirely. There were two significant events in Elijah's life that had to do really with his spirit and with his power. One of them was when he stood up and said, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word, and then disappeared for 3.5 years. Elijah, a man like we are, prayed, and it didn't rain for 3.5 years, and then he prayed, and it rained again. Okay? The second big thing in Elijah of power that's worth noting is that he was able to call down fire from heaven on 1, 2, 3 separate occasions. This is a pretty spectacular form of power, I would say. And he come to the two witnesses who prophesy for 1,260 days. If you're not quick on math, that's 3.5 years, the same period of time Elijah was. These have the power that stopped the rain during the days of their prophecy, so it doesn't rain for 3.5 years. And they have the power to call down fire from heaven and destroy their enemies at will. These are the two most significant illustrations of the power of Elijah, and they are the two witnesses in Revelation 11, right at the very end time, the last period of time before the return of Christ, who do the same thing. One of those blokes is Elijah at the end. Now, Elijah was long dead and buried. We know he was an antitype, though. Elijah is also a future character who will appear on the scene before the day of the Lord, which is a one-time in history thing, an event at the very end of the age. Now, I understand the task that is talked about here in this last section of Malachi. He shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with destruction. The destruction of the family is getting close to completion in our society. I know there are a lot of families still there. I know a lot of families are still holding on. But the axe has been taken to the root of the trees. And the entire structure of the family in our society has been weakened beyond, I think, ultimately beyond repair. I mean, we're headed for a disaster of incredible proportions. 1 baby out of 3 being born in this country right now is being born to a mother who has no husband. 1 out of 3. Of all the little urchins running around out here below a certain age, right? Add to that group of little urchins the ones whose daddy got up and left their mama and ran off with another cutie and left her with a lurch and doesn't bother making his child support payments anymore. Add to those the number of divorces that the guy's gone off somewhere and makes his child support payments, never sees his kids, or if he does sees them once a month, every 3 months, every 6 months, or what have you. You put this whole package together, and you have millions of little children running around who have no dominant male influence in their life at all, and who, whenever they think of the dominant male influence that ought to be in their life, think of a deadbeat, a coward, a guy who doesn't care about them, someone who ran off and left them whenever they were in the lurch with their mama. This is what these guys know about fathers. Parents use children like spears and arrows to hurl at one another in divorce proceedings. Dads with jobs still won't pay his child support. There's a point of no return in any society when the family has gone beyond reclaim, and when that happens, society is gone as well. There's a point of no return in any society, and that's something that's out there ahead of us. Now, all this part's clear. All this I understand. I understand why it is that the job has to be done. I understand why, if it's not done, we're headed for big-time trouble. What is not so clear is why Elijah is the man for the job. And I thought long and hard about this. And when I asked the question, I went back and I read all about Elijah one more time. I went back to his initial pronunciation, as the Lord God lives before whom I stand. That's his mantra. There shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word. He disappears and he's gone for 3.5 years. Man of few words. Never use 2 words when one will say it. I went back and I read through that. I went back and I read through the elements about when he came back to see Ahab again and when he met the priests at Mount Carmel, and they went through all the challenge that took place there. Read all through the man's life again, and I couldn't find any real concrete reason why it should be Elijah. Now, you got to think about this. When this was written down, when God spoke these words to Malachi, and Malachi dutifully wrote them down, he could have said, I will send you a prophet before the coming of the day of the Lord, and he'll turn the hearts of the children. He could have said, I'll send Hosea, I'll send Moses, I'll send Isaiah, I'll send Daniel, I'll send whoever I will send. But he didn't. He picked Elijah, the prophet. Now, why would he do that? And as I said, I went back, read all the way through Elijah, his life, his work, his ministry, and I couldn't find any concrete reason why it should be Elijah. As far as I know, the only interaction that ever took place between Elijah and a child was when he brought the widow's son back to life after he died. That's the only time. And I don't know that he ever spoke to that kid apart from that occasion when he prayed for him and brought him back to life. Certainly wasn't a father figure in the kid's life. After that, children play no role. Elijah was not a daddy. There's no indication he was ever married, ever had a wife, ever had any kids. So the reason can't have very much to do with the skills of fathering when it comes to this question of turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and turning the hearts of the children to the fathers. Maybe I thought it's not that the ministry of the last Elijah will be a ministry to children or even to families. Elijah's main work is with men, not children. Turning the hearts of children to their fathers is no trick. Is it really? Turning the hearts of children to their fathers is no trick. The hard part is turning the heart of the dad to the children. Elijah's main work, I think, is with men. Elijah isn't sent to turn the hearts of mothers to their children. The fact is, when we get to the place where somebody's got to turn the hearts of mothers to their children, we're finished. Because God has seen to it that mothers bond with those children, and that is not so likely to do that. The hard part of the job is getting men to be men. Now, I've known for a long time that God chooses his tools very carefully. Unlike some of you fellows sitting out here in front of me right now, God would never use a penknife in place of a screwdriver. Never would he attempt to do a thing like that. God will always pick up his best screwdriver to remove the screw. He may have a power screwdriver. The battery will never be down. He will always have the tool for the job at the time. I very much believe that God chooses those tools carefully. So when he needed a man to deal with the worst king in Israel's history, number one, bad hombre, all the way around. His name was Ahab. There was not one king, it says, that sold himself to do evil in the sight of God like Ahab. So when he decides, I've got myself a man here who is a real bad character, and I've got to pick my tool to send to speak to this man, Elijah is the man that he chose. He was not the only prophet active at that time, by the way. There's another one named Micaiah and 2 or 3 others that are mentioned through this whole section. There are many times, in fact, there was one occasion where some people had to actually take good news, instructions to go in and win a battle to Ahab, and Elijah didn't get to do it. Sent somebody else. It was only when he needed to really hit this man that he sent Elijah. Maybe there's something in there that we ought to think about in his choice of this particular prophet. He chose, when he needed a man to deal with the worst king in Israel, he did not look for a smooth man. He did not look for an eloquent man. He chose a blunt man, a man of few words. He chose a man who had no hesitation when it came to inflicting pain. None whatever. And who had, as far as I can discern, never showed a flicker of pity. No. There was this occasion. Well, I'll come to it in a moment, but this man, he brings a drought on a whole country for 3.5 years. Never says he was sorry for it. Never expressed any regret. Never gave a hint that it bothered him in the least by the fact that he had to go live with a widow up in the north somewhere where he could eat. Didn't bother Elijah. And when he came back and they went through the whole rigmarole on Mount Carmel, he wasn't feeling sorry for anybody. He made fun of the priests, ridiculed them, called him louder. He said, maybe he's gone fishing. Maybe he's gone to the bathroom. Something like that. And when it was all over, he took those priests down and killed every one of them without mercy. What kind of man we're dealing with here? He is himself a tough one. He wasn't looking for a man like Samuel who would cry all night after God rejected Saul. He wasn't looking for a man like Isaiah who could sing songs that could bring a sensitive person to his knees in tears. No, didn't want men like that. He wanted Elijah. He was not looking for a good news kind of guy. Now, you may have noticed there is no book of Elijah in the Bible. I was good to you. I didn't say, now please turn to Elijah 3. Somebody would have probably tried to turn to Elijah 3. He didn't write a book. You know why Elijah didn't write a book? He didn't have enough to say. You need words to write a book. Elijah just did not have enough to say. He was a different breed of cat from Isaiah. Isaiah was an eloquent man, a poet. Elijah was a rough-hewn, blunt man. Just as simple as that. And it occurred to me, as I read through this all about Elijah, there is one thing that Elijah is absolutely, certainly, most surely not. He is not a mother figure. He is about as far from that as a prophet might be. He was not very much in touch with the feminine side of his nature. There is no suggestion that he had ever gone through sensitivity training. I think it would have been a waste of time with Elijah. And Malachi said nothing about turning the hearts of the mothers to the children. That's not the task. When the women stop caring for the children, the jig is up. It's the men, it's men that are the big question mark. In our society, the war on the male has been going on for a long time. It has run all the way from Dagwood Bumstead to Home Improvement. Situation comedies down through the years that have cast the man as a total bumbler who had to be rescued by his wife on the one hand or by his children on another. It's been television sitcoms. It's been Disney movies. It's been every kind of movie and comedy and what have you, where poor old dad is made to look like an utter and complete and total failure down through time. Well, the war on men has led to such a lowering of expectations that I guess men finally decided we just live down to them. I really think you will find that if you go back 100 years in this country, you will find a different breed of man. You'd find a man that did take care of his family. You'd find a man that was responsible for his children. You'd find a man who was a father figure in the home with all that that entailed. But because of the continued ongoing assault on the family, the home, and in particular, upon the father. And you all know that's true. It's another subject. I could take a whole sermon to do that. I'm taking you to this point because I believe you know that it is true, that there has been a systematic, destructive force on the father in our society. It has led to such a lowering of expectations that men don't have anything really to live up to in that way anymore. Neither fathers, nor husbands, nor children are very good about exceeding expectations. You know, if you don't expect a lot of us, generally speaking, we're not going to produce it. So perhaps it will require not merely a prophet, but a certain kind of prophet to engage the man in us. And that's the thing I began to wonder as I continued to explore the question, why Elijah? There's an incident in the later years of Elijah that's informative, I think. Ahab is dead and gone, but Elijah isn't dead and he's not ready to go yet. You'll find the incident in the second book of Kings. And it's a fascinating story. One of my favorite stories, frankly, in the whole Bible. I'm not sure why, but it is. King Ahaziah is sick. Fell down through a lattice in his chamber, and he was sick, and he sent messengers and said, I want you to go to Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, to see whether I will recover for this disease or not. Get up and go. Well, as they went on their way, Elijah met him. They didn't know who he was. He just was there. And he says, where are you going? And he told them where they were going and why they were going. Well, you go back and you tell the king he's not going to get better. He's going to die. So they went back with not very pleasant task on their hands to say, well, we didn't quite get to Beelzebub. We ran into this guy. And he says, you go back and tell the king he's not going to get better. He's going to die. And he said to these guys, he said, what did this man look like? And they said, well, he was a hairy man, and he was girded in leather. And Ahaziah didn't miss a heartbeat. He said, it's Elijah. Now, how often do you just have to describe a man that way before somebody knows who you're talking about? This man was known far and wide. All the kings knew him. Everybody knew about him. He was a hairy man. He wore a stark leather girdle around himself. And as a result of this, everybody knew this is not a man to be trifled with. So what he did, he sent a platoon of soldiers out there. He says, you go out there and you get him and you bring him back to me. So the captain and the soldiers went charging out to find Elijah. Elijah's sitting up on the side of a hill. And they come up there and they look up there and say, there you are, man of God. Come on down here and we'll take you in to see the king. Elijah says, if I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. Guess what happened? Searing flame came roaring down out of the sky, and their 50 charred corpses lying on the ground. So nothing happens. The king sends out another captain, 50 more guys. And he's not quite as bold as the first one was, but nevertheless, got his orders. Elijah, man of God, come down from up there, and we're going to take you in to see the king. If I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. And you already know what happened. You'd have known it if you hadn't read the story. Now, the third guy he sends out there wises up. The third guy goes out there, he and 50 guys behind him, and he's very concerned about this. And he comes up there with his knees knocking and trembling, and he falls on the ground, and he calls up to Elijah, man of God, if I have found grace in your sight. And I mean, he is humble, he is kind, he is pleased, whatever it may take. And the Spirit of God says, go down, you can go with this man, and you'll be safe. Now, why am I bringing all this stuff up? Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because this was a manly man. a hairy man, girded with a girdle. You see, it's not that these things like this are themselves important. They are a part of the image. And images are important. All of us are learning nowadays in the modern world what icons are. We get on our computers and we learn the icons. We see a little printer up there, and we know if we print on that, there's a chance, not a real good chance, but a chance we may be able to print a document. We know also all the different things. There's a little diskette. We click on that, we will save our document, which we generally forget to do until after the computer's gone 2 or 3 times and we've lost 3 or 4 hours work. Then we learn to click on that little thing. But we learn what all these icons are. Well, you have to understand that when God chooses a prophet, it is not merely a matter of the message. There's an icon involved. There's an image. There's what he wants it to look like, not just what he wants it to sound like. And there is a message to be conveyed in the messenger himself, just like there is in the message itself. And that's why when you're dealing with this man, you realize you are dealing not only with the archetypical prophet, but with the archetypical male. Because one of the things about Elijah that is as clear as crystal is this man is male all the way through. Now, why is that important? Well, I want to discuss this whole thing with you now. We are not Elijah, and it's presumptuous for us to ever assume that we might do his job or even approach to do his job. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't take a hard look at the last 10 words of the Old Testament and ask ourselves, what do these say to us in our generation? Lest I come and smite the earth with utter destruction. I came to this while I was asking God what we ought to be giving our attention to right now. Are we running around in circles and chasing after doctrinal rabbits and chasing all kinds of things down when we're neglecting some of the more important issues and tasks that we ought to be giving our attention to? How important is this issue? That's easy. How important is survival? You like living? You like staying alive? That's how important it is. To what extent is it within our grasp to do anything about this? That's a problem. I do believe it is to the extent that we are or know anyone who is a father. At that level, where one person is a father and has children, there must be something that can be addressed at that point. Because this is the point. We use the cliche, when the rubber meets the road. Well, when father meets son, when father meets daughter, that is the place where something can be done about this particular challenge. I don't know where else to go other than there. And if you're don't have your own children, if you're not a father, then perhaps you can help fathers. Perhaps you can help, as we're trying to do in many cases, to provide materials and encouragement and things to help fathers to do their job perhaps a little better. But when it all boils down to it, old dad has got to come through at some time. Sometimes it may be necessary to go out and find old dad. Sometimes it may be necessary to go out and find old dad and get his attention. Sometimes it may be necessary for a couple of big old boys to put old dad up against the wall and say, how come you're not paying your child support? When are you going to start taking care of your little kids? If you don't start taking care of your little kids, we may be around to take care of you. Now, do you think that's a very unbiblical thing to do? What do you think Elijah would do if he were faced with that kind of situation? It wouldn't be a very simple matter. It wouldn't be any sympathy. It wouldn't send the guy to sensitivity training. Nothing of the kind. It is as natural as breathing, I think, for mothers to teach children, although there may be some exceptions to that. It is not natural like that for fathers. But it is, if anything, even more important. And it may be more critical because it's not as natural as it is for mothers. You can't trust dads to do it. Something's going to have to come along and whack dad upside the head, and he's going to have to deal with this. Mothers, they're with these children. Nature has put it in such a way that they're going to bond with these babies as they're growing up. And they are going to teach. People are finally beginning to realize that little boys and little girls are different. It was astonishing several months ago. Cover story on a major magazine was, scientists discover little boys and little girls are different. Different psychologically. You can't bring up little girls, like little boys, or little boys like little girls. We're different. And a few people here and there are beginning to realize that the father image in the family is critical in the development of children. There needs to be a strong male in the family. Dr. Laura Schlesinger is making a lot of enemies for herself, frankly, by her continual haranguing on the importance of the male in the life of a child. I was appalled with the treatment she got in a story the other night on television, a little documentary about her work, a little news item, at the way in which they were doing their dead level best to cut that woman down. They can cut away. She's not coming down, I don't think, anytime soon. That is one tough lady. And as far as she is concerned, any dad that doesn't do his duty with a child, for his children, is lower than a snake's belly. And she isn't going to cut any of them any slack any time. Problem is, she's a woman. That's not bad. That's good. But God is going to send a man who probably will look like a biker. The kind of a guy who is going to tell men the same thing with a force and a fervency that I don't know that he can be much stronger than Laura Schlesinger is. I really honestly don't. But sometimes there needs to be a little steel, a little fire behind what it is that needs to be said to a man. I mean, I'll never forget the first time that I heard her refer to some guy who had begotten the child of a lady and ran off as a sperm donor. I wasn't used to hearing that sort of thing on the radio. To make the distinction, no, he's not a father. He's not the child's father. He's the sperm donor. Okay, I got that clear. God bless Dr. Laura for being our national nag. I think she is having an effect on a lot of people. But what this country really needs is an Elijah. The country needs an Elijah. A hairy man who wears leather and calls down fire from heaven. Maybe we can get a few deadbeat dads to come forward and start paying child support for their children if we can find that kind of thing. And the Church of God needs its fathers to stand up and play the man. Let's go back in conclusion today, before I shut this down, and let's read this end of the the Old Testament in context. We'll start with Malachi 3 and verse 13. Malachi 3 and verse 13. He's very strong in this section against the priests, against the religious leaders, against the leadership of the country in so many different angles. And he keeps approaching them from different angles of their denials. He said, "Your words have been very stout against me, saith the Lord. Yet you say, why, what have we spoken against you?" Here's what you said, God replies. You say it's vain to serve God. You say there's no benefit in serving God. You're not going to gain anything if you serve God. And what profit is that we keep his ordinance and we've walked mournfully before the Lord of the host? That's how your words have been stout against me. What you're saying is, it doesn't do me any good to serve God. And now we call the proud happy. And yea, they that work wickedness are set up. And they that tempt God are delivered. Then they that feared the Lord, he says, actually this is poetry, and he slides off into a different perspective. Then they that feared the Lord spoke often with one another, and the Lord listened and heard it, and a book of remembrance was written before him of them that feared the Lord and thought upon his name. They shall be mine, saith the Lord, in that day when I make up my jewels, and I will spare them as a man spares his own son that serves him. Then shall you return and discern between the righteous and the wicked, between him that serves God and him that serves him not. The implication in this is pretty clear. That as time goes by, the line between those who serve God and those who don't serve God becomes very, very blurred. And I'll refer you to the whole book of Malachi if you really want to understand the kind of thing that God's talking about. We have our doctrinal ideas and our ideas about what the things that we think are important and make issues out of. They are not necessarily the things that the prophets come along and slap Israel beside the head for doing. Behold, the day comes that shall burn as an oven, and the proud and all that do wickedly shall be stubble, and the day comes that shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, and will leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. And he shall go forth, and you shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. You will tread down the wicked. There will be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I do this. What's the time context of this? We're talking day of the Lord, aren't we? We're right at the very end time. Remember you the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded him in Israel for all Israel, with all the statutes and all the judgments. Here we are, a prophecy right at the very end time. The day of the Lord, the return of Christ, the wicked being ashes under our feet. What's the message? Remember the law of Moses. I thought that was done away with at the cross. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he will turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with utter destruction. And you know, the more I think about this, the sillier some of the ideas are that I have heard in the past about the end-time Elijah. And you have some character walk up to you, a scraggly beard, ugly, unwashed in character, and proclaim himself to be Elijah. You know, no minister is allowed to be a striker, and so I would never, ever be able to do this. But you really feel like punching somebody like that right in the nose. Why? Why would I feel like doing that? Because it is such an insult to the real man, to the real Elijah who is to come. People have hung that label on some people down through the generations. I want to tell you something. I'm on the record. Elijah has not come yet, but he will. And I would not like to be one who has claimed to be Elijah when he does. God help us, because as we get down toward the very end time, the turning of the hearts of the fathers to the children, the heart of the children to the fathers, the saving of the earth from destruction, the initial step before the return of Christ is a hairy man wearing leather. Maybe he'll even ride in on a Harley.